Good evening. Uganda's high-octane politics recently went through its motions as Mugisha Muntu, alongside his acolytes, left the largest opposition party, FDC. A wave of violence has been registered across the country, including the Arua incident. Why does the specter of violence continue to haunt this country? And does the task become even more harder for a fractured opposition to contest against the ruling party juggernaut? On the spotlight is the former FDC party president, Dr Kizza Besigye. Dr. Besigye, thank you for responding to our invitation. You're on the spot tonight.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. And a very good evening to all the NTV viewers, wherever you are viewing from.
Let me begin by getting a quotation from what the news conference today that you're quoted saying, elimination of political opponents has always been done using subtle means, like poisoning, but now shifting to more overt and radical ways. Those are your words. You also claim that the state intended to kill Bobi Wine and pin that on you, Dr. Besigye. Where is the evidence of those who were poisoned? And again, where is the evidence that the state planned to frame you?
Well, I'm sure you know that there are many leaders that have died in very suspicious circumstances. And indeed, where citizens have demanded to know the cause of death, and where, as you know, no report has been forthcoming. And I don't need to go through the names. You know, I'm sure even in your own home area, there is still an outstanding case there.
So are you saying...
Where indeed Brigadier Mayombo is, famously reported to have said, as he was passing away, that these thugs have killed me. So, you know, I think we will not be doing ourselves or the country justice to put our heads in the sand and to pretend that unless there is a smoking gun as to who has killed who, that there shouldn't be assignment of responsibility, especially where indeed prominent people have perished, have died in this country. And they are, pretty many, and the country is always kept waiting to know in conclusive terms. So if you're asking for a smoking gun, no, I don't have it.
So are you stating this government is criminal and has committed so many crimes, including eliminating people from within?
Well, committing crimes, they have. And I think some are, indeed out there that the debate has always been whether they are done in the individual capacity or whether they are sanctioned by the state. But I mean, just recently, look at the massacre of the people in Kasese. This is something where any civilized society would have had an independent inquiry into such a killing of that proportion to establish who is responsible, what were the dynamics, and so on and so forth. Up to now, there is nothing. They say that the killers have investigated. You cannot be the person accused of committing an offense and you are the investigator. It's simply not on. So there is a serious problem of managing of security matters, and as I have said, which are related to politics. And the sooner we come to terms with them,
but
the
if
better.
This government you are talking about was intending to kill Dr. Besigye, you have given them a lot of headache. You have competed against President Museveni more than 4 times. You are the person, in fact, they compete against, they think about if they want to stay in power. You should have been, God forbid, number 1 on the list.
Yes, fortunately there is a higher power than all ourselves. There is a God up there.
And that God only works for Besigye?
No, that's why there are 40 million people in this country. But there is also evil. And sometimes evil succeeds, sometimes it doesn't. And quite obviously, you know that I am not here because I have not had very challenging times when indeed I could have passed.
Are you saying they have tempted you? Like they have tried to take you out?
I've said this many times before. It happened while I was still in South Africa. It has happened while I'm here. But what I was focusing on today, and which I think indeed the country needs to pay attention to, is something serious. Because you see, there is a tendency of people, to look at what is happening within the opposition very superficially, and sometimes in the lenses of the government propaganda machinery, saying this is just a confused, indeed fractured opposition and so on and so forth. But whereas it is indeed legitimate for anybody to cause confusion in the opposing forces, I have said, and on good source, that there is a lot of deliberate and choreographed activity that is quite dangerous for many people as we go along. And I mean, you see what happened in Arua. Somebody was actually killed. So we are not talking about speculation. We are talking about somebody who is killed in a place where the Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi was seated. Up to now, there is no talk about who actually shot and killed that person, in what circumstances. It would require an inquiry, and not just an inquiry of the people that are involved in the incident. These are serious matters, but you don't see any form of seriousness in all this. And the other thing, I pointed out is, forget about, what is not known. We saw a senior political person say that his home was surrounded by heavily armed people. He's on record saying my home was attacked by heavily armed people.
You're talking about the
Honorable Besigye. He's on record saying his home was surrounded by people carrying automatic guns, some carrying rocket-propelled grenades. He even counted them, or somebody counted them who were there. Now, these are very, very serious allegations. And he said that, those people who had gone there had gone to kill him. He even knows the purpose why they intended to kill him. And you don't see any form of serious interrogation of what has gone on. It just passes as if nothing serious has happened. These are very, very serious matters.
But also they are coming at a time when you have some kind of internal political division within the party. That Honorable Bwambale behind it.
You see again, political contestation within political organizations is a constant. There is absolutely no time in any political organization anywhere in the world where there is no contestation, because that's what the political organizations are about. They are about contestation of ideas, contestation for leadership, and there will be contestation within organizations. That does not mean that it goes into situations where indeed guns come into the picture. So we are now shifting from what is ordinary political contestation, which is perfectly all right, which is normal, which is legitimate, to element. You see, a government has the monopoly of weapons. Weapons, you are not supposed to hold the weapon. Where a weapon comes, where somebody is shot and killed, where somebody says there are guns surrounding me, this is now a question of state security. It has nothing to do with whether there are political contestations or whatever. And many people have been killed. We had the Abiriga case. Nobody has been arrested. He's killed. He's in his grave. We are not talking about something imaginary. We have this young police officer who was killed just recently. So there are real situations that we are dealing with. And whereas, you know, indeed, somebody, I have heard people say, this is alarmist. You don't want to talk after the fact, to say you knew there was a threat, the threat has crystallized into some actions, and you don't shine a torch on it. I think it's important that we shine a torch.
So in your analysis, why now? Why now?
And why now is indeed what I talked about. The overall security situation that the country is grappling with, which is both here in the urban centers and all over the country, arises from very severe challenges within the politics, within the economy, and within the social sphere. The politics, the fact that we have a regime of more than 3 decades which has progressively lost popular legitimacy, which came in 1986 when it was very popular, has progressively lost legitimacy, is now besieged. You have a regime whose members of parliament, representatives of people, need protection. The country has to pay heavily to guard every member of parliament from their constituents. Whom else are they guarding them from? You know? So we have a political crisis of a regime that is besieged.
Are you not really making a mountain out of a mole? Because members of parliament, the last time I checked, they were moving in the constituencies. I've met quite a number of them in Western Uganda.
I'm sure you know that this is a matter that has been discussed formally, and indeed that security has been provided to these members of parliament.
Some members of parliament.
Well, all of them, security was...
That's not true, Dr. Besigye.
No, all of them, some may opt not to take them, but all of them were granted security. And the reason that happens, so it's not an isolated case of protecting one. It is something that has been formally discussed and a provision made. I'm sure you know that it has also been discussed and formally decided that actually vehicles should be bought, additional vehicles should be bought, because even their guards sitting with them in the same vehicle is not safe. Is this imaginary? Is this building a mountain? Everybody who lives in this country has seen this. These are facts. So we have a political...
that has been stated. I'm yet to see members of parliament, each one of them with their sharpshooters and driving around.
Well, I'm sure
that has not happened. At least I haven't seen it.
Where you need to go,
apart from a few,
where you need to go and visit parliament and see what environment they operate in. So this is a situation which clearly demonstrates that we have a regime under siege. And indeed, you've seen senior leaders attacked, vice president, humiliated and members stopped from public engagements and chased and so on. This is a common. The other day you saw at the burial of Kirumira what happened to the Minister of Internal Affairs and his people and so on. So there is no pretense that there is a political crisis, and a political crisis arising out of a long-standing regime that has totally lost legitimacy. And this is also on account of what happened in the election of 2016, because I am still charged with treason, as you know. I was locked up in Moroto prison, where I was first charged with treason, later on transferred to Luzira maximum security, charged with treason in Kampala. That case has never been brought to be heard. It's now more than long after 2 years. The case has not been heard. Why? The reason I was charged with treason was because it was said I declared myself a winner of the elections and so on. And this is a matter I have confessed to. Said, yes, I declared myself a winner because I won and I have evidence. And we've been demanding for an audit formally. So there is a very serious legitimacy problem, political legitimacy problem. You see, you cannot contest in an election in a situation that is similar to ours, and you think that, you know, because you will remember that after that election, we were arrested violently from our headquarters the very day after the election, before even results came out. You will remember that, you know, your media houses that were producing results, they were shut down and so on. These are all matters that add up to the lack of legitimacy that I am talking about. And so when the more that a regime loses legitimacy, the more it uses force to maintain itself in power. And hence, the ruthlessness you see all over the place. You know, these pictures which I was shocked, you know, to hear somebody passing as a minister responsible for defense of this country tell Parliament in broad daylight that those pictures are from Nigeria, that they must be from there. You know, pictures of journalists that are being clobbered in broad daylight here, pictures of residents of my village in Kasangati. You saw how these transitioning military people are treating civilians, taxpayers, the owners of this country. Now, these are very clear indications of a government under siege, of a regime under siege, regime without any form of popular legitimacy, and the insecurity, therefore, that we see comes from there. What happened in Arua, which is one of the things indeed that was of our concern, was that the unit that brutalized these colleagues of ours is a unit of the Special Forces Command that guards Mr. Museveni. A unit called the Commando Unit, whose role indeed, I understand it was trained by North Koreans and so on, and that is now its assignment. These are very serious matters for our country to deal with. We must deal with them. We don't have any other country. This is our country that is being clearly mismanaged. You
also mentioned, Dr. Besigye, that there has been a comprehensive plan to raid your home. Why raid your home and why now?
No, I didn't say a comprehensive plan. You know, what had, and you know, you are right. You know, sometimes I don't want to dwell on details that may even endanger my sources. But, you know, the intended scheme, which happily did not succeed, is that we were supposed to have rivalry between me and my brother Robert Kyagulanyi, and that we were going to be fighting. And indeed, there was a lot of attempt to foment such non-existent confrontation, and that once it matured, then the idea was to kill Bobby Wine and charge me as having been responsible. And
do you know you're making very serious allegations?
Yes, 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 I am. I am not somebody who talks casually.
That statement you just made is very explosive.
I am, and I have said, you know, actually somebody was killed, and that somebody who was killed could or ought to have been my brother Robert. So, but the thing is, you know, we need to step back as a country if all this is to be averted. We are going to see worse. You know, as I have explained to you, the source of this is the collapsing legitimacy. It has been gradual, collapsing legitimacy. And as the popular legitimacy collapses, then the use of force increases to counter. And we are now in a situation where we are heading, as I have pointed out, for some kind of a state of emergency. All this recruitment that is taking place is not idle. The 24,000 people that are being recruited in Kampala alone, or for Kampala alone, these are very serious matters. And recruited, you know, ostensibly as local defense units, which clearly they are not. So, you know, we need to be more serious as citizens of this country to appreciate the very serious situation that we now live with, and to work our way through it. You know, trying to pretend that we don't have these situations will lead us into a catastrophe.
But now, when you are campaigning in Arua, I saw you at a campaign rally, and I saw the Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi also appear closer to where you were. And that was a potential for a real disaster between your supporter
Absolutely.
and Honorable Kyagulanyi's supporter.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So, have you ever since spoken to Honorable Robert Kyagulanyi about that incident?
Oh yes, we speak. Even today I had a chat with him. We speak. And he highly regrets what happened. And you see, Robert went to Arua as, you know, a last-minute kind of decision. He was not involved in that campaign up to the end. He just went at the end of it, at the very tip end of it. And, you know, so he was in a situation that he did not control. And indeed, in those situations, you see, this is why I'm saying, and my appeal is to my colleagues in the struggle. We must be more discerning. We must be more careful as to how we manage ourselves, how we manage our processes. Otherwise, a lot can happen that we do not have control over, or that we do not intend ourselves to happen. And I think that was such a case. As I have told you, it could have ended in a much, much worse situation. Happily, I think we're lucky. We responded in a careful way, and indeed the worst did not happen. But you see, as I have said, whereas the regime we seek to remove that has caused a lot of pain to many people is expected to do what it can to stay in power. That's what we expect. It's not that we don't expect it to to fold easily.
You criticize the recruitment of LODUs, and yet the people in Kasangati and the people watching you want security, and I've heard them say they want to see visibly the security officers, that they want boots on the ground. How do you want it to be done? How did you do it back in the day when you were fighting in the bush?
Well, two things. One, as I have pointed out, it's important to address the causes rather than the symptoms. Symptoms must be addressed too, but you must zoom into the causes. And this is why I was telling you that some of the causes are political, some are economic. There is an economic crisis where the greatest majority of our citizens are totally excluded from the economy. They live on the margins completely. They have no means of subsistence. They live without expecting the next meal, and in large numbers. You don't deal with that by just appearing with these dummy checks Mr. Museveni rotates around the ghettos with whenever there is a demonstration to give handouts to some people. That's not the response. You must respond to the source, what has failed the economy.
You see, most of the time you have come out to criticize, yet the people of Uganda are expecting you, I suppose, to be telling them that maybe the alternative policy proposals, the ideas of what needs to be done. Because if they see that light, perhaps they can join you more in mass than they have already done.
You see, yes, we do. The reason we don't, and because we do, that's why there is massive support for change. That support for change did not come without people appreciating the situation, the terrible situation in which they are, and appreciating the kind of Uganda that is possible out there. We have done both. Contrary to the regime propaganda and mantra, we have presented very sound policies, some of which they have tried to copy and disastrously failed because they are not committed to them. Like the revival of agriculture. Agriculture in this country collapsed thanks to the regime policies. Agriculture was the backbone of this economy, and especially for the rural economy. It's totally collapsed, whether it is agriculture of the crop producing people, whether it's animal husbandry or whatever, both have collapsed.
But we are...
what to do in the economy, if one wants a debate on that, we are alive and prepared for it. But the point here is that no matter how good the policies are, no matter how much support you have, like we won the election of 2016, that is not what will cause the loss of power or the gaining of power. It won't, because power here is not mediated by popular support. It is mediated by force. That's why in this country of ours, no leader since independence has become the leader of our country through the will of the people. Every leader who has become a leader reached there using force. So it's force that mediates. And that is the first
So
challenge.
That's the first challenge. Dr. Besigye,
that's the first.
Can you, Dr. Besigye, and your colleagues be part of the change that Uganda need, because you are part of that group that used force to remove a government? You really belong to that group. In fact, the majority of Ugandans are no longer looking at you, I suppose. They're not looking at General Muntu or President Museveni. It appears that they're looking at some other Ugandans younger that are not beholden to that narrative of you guys who went to the bush and fought.
You see, it will be, you know, totally missing their point to look at individuals, regardless of who they are. The crux of the matter is how to shift the power from control by a few people using guns to the greatest majority of the people. What mechanism do we use? And how do we mobilize for it? That is the crux of the matter, not who is involved. Excuse me. So, and quite often that's the mistake that our people make. Confuse the purpose of the struggle with the leaders within the struggle. The focus of everybody must remain on transforming power. Because you can have, this is not a some people say it's a generational struggle. It's not. It's a liberation struggle. The two are different. Yes, within a liberation struggle, a generation might have a mission.
Yes, but it's becoming increasingly clear that the likes of you now belong to that generation of leaders that perhaps Uganda do not want to work with you anymore. You have done your part and it's done. When I see Robert Kyagulanyi and his group of people power, it appears to me that they are now no longer want to work with Dr. Besigye, not with General Muntu, not with General Museveni, and they look at themselves young, dynamic, and they don't want to look back into that history.
You see,
because they don't know it, and they don't want to know.
Again, you are making a mistake of thinking that what they want to look at, and if they are making a mistake indeed, that they are looking at an individual or looking at the age or what, they will be totally missing their point and they will remain marginalized. What they must focus on, what every Ugandan must be focused on, and which has been my commitment, and certainly the message of all those that have been struggling with us, has been that this is not about anybody. And that's why when you talk about people's power, you cannot talk about people's power and then it's people to determine who leads them, ultimately. But they cannot determine that before they get power. You see, people are totally powerless. They have no votes. That's why even people who say, we go to the election. With who? These people have no votes. A vote is not a piece of paper that is handed to you by a military dictator seeking to legitimize themselves. That's not a vote.
But more often you take that route thinking you can take power through that route.
No, we are very clear what we do in the elections. Because in a military dictatorship, like we have, in a military regime, very thinly veiled regime like we have, because it's not easy to hold, to influence political will of people, you don't have very much opportunity. You know, you call a meeting, tell me, can I call a meeting tomorrow to meet the residents even of my village in Kasangat and succeed? It won't happen. Then all the paraphernalia of the security that fails to guard people when they are insecure will come to stop my meeting. So the opportunity that is provided by elections has been very critical in affording us a rare time to influence will of our citizens, to communicate. And it is through those communications in the rare times of elections that that will has been formed in the whole country for people to know that our country is hostage, that they are actually captives, that they must fight to regain control of the country, that they must get their power back. So don't think that this people power that you see, our power, people saying our power, it has not come by itself. It has been through concerted effort, indeed including the coming up of my brother Robert Kyagulanyi. He has been awakened by the people you think are irrelevant. It's our concerted effort over now nearly 20 years that has awakened the whole country. And it is that awakening, especially of the young people, that then should be focused on regaining control over the country. Once we have control over the country, so the struggle now is not a struggle for leadership. And if we veer that side, then we've lost it. The struggle now is a struggle for the country. Once we have the country, there must be a transitional process through which the power that has been wrestled out of the dictators is then appropriated in the country. First, through a constitutional process, constitution-making process. We must review the constitution and distribute power through the constitution. Two, we must rebuild state institutions which are now hostage of the dictatorship. So we now have institutions of Mr. Museveni. They must now become people's institution once people regain power. We must have a process of healing the country, because our country is actually, an annoyed country through a lot of trauma. The wars that have inflicted a lot of damage on our people, the deprivation, you see people taking billions and trillions while others can't meet their very basic means of survival. So we have an angry country that we must pass through a process of healing.
Hold on.
And after that, there will be free and fair elections, which is the time leaders should contest for power.
Hold on to your point, retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye. We're going to take a break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara. My guest tonight is retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, the former president of the Forum for Democratic Change. Colonel Besigye, the Daily Monitor in September published a story revealing that you had signed an MOU to initiate talks on key issues, amongst which are audit of the 2016 polls, rule of law in the country, human rights, corruption, governance, and other pertinent issues. How far did this process go?
Well, unfortunately not far. As I have pointed out, our critical concern has been to establish the outcome of the 2016 elections, which we contend did not end as provided for in the Constitution, because the Constitution is very clear that every contesting candidate has the right to challenge whatever is announced as an outcome of that election. In other words, what is announced does not become the final outcome unless the process provided for by the Constitution to challenge it has been exhausted. That was not exhausted in respect of my case, because I was under illegal detention. And we actually succeeded in getting a judgment of court to confirm that I was illegally detained. I have a judgment to show that I was under illegal detention. Not even my lawyers could come to me, and indeed my lawyers tried and were stopped. So I was prevented illegally by the state from exercising the constitutional right that exists in respect of my candidature.
So
now that is the matter that we have been focused on to establish what happened. Regrettably, we have not had, favorable response on the other side.
So the Elders Forum and the Interreligious Council of Uganda, and quite a number of people have talked about the need for a national dialogue. It appears that the national dialogue from your side should also look into the audit of the 2016 polls.
No. You see,
is that a condition?
No. That engagement was an engagement by the candidate, me, who was ill-treated in violation of the Constitution. It was not an engagement that covers a national dialogue. In other words, it's not a substitute. It was to determine a limited problem.
But
moving forward
with the 2016 elections, you want the national dialogue also to look into the 2016 polls, because that could be an encumbrance now, even to have a dialogue.
You see, a dialogue, I have not, paid much attention to what they are saying in whatever dialogue they're organizing, because there have been many kinds of dialogue. The critical thing one has to appreciate, on Tuesday next week, it will be 56 years since independence. 56. The greatest majority of Ugandans have been born during this time, maybe 90% or so. They have never seen a peaceful handover of power from one leader to another. And that is because of what I have talked about, that there is a crisis of state capture. We are in a captured state. So if you are considering dialogue, that dialogue, and that is the crux of the matter, all other things flow from that. The economic problems we were talking about flow from that political problem.
You expect
corruption, all these things.
President Museveni and the NRM government to sit with you and other people in a dialogue, to literally dialogue themselves out of power?
Absolutely not. And that's why I think that the organizers of a dialogue, depending on what they want to get, would be naive to think that it could go to the extent of freeing the state by persuasion of those who hold it captive, that now, that it's too much, that it's so much, you release us and we get our power back and we exercise. It cannot happen. So the reasonable way of addressing the Uganda's political crisis, because it's a crisis of failure of transition. That's the crisis. When NRA was in the bush, and the records are very clear, we were clear that the crisis of Uganda is a political one. It's not economic, it's not what. It arises out of failure to manage the politics. And the failure to manage the politics, failure to manage a transition of power from few people to the greatest majority of people. Regrettably, that is still the case. Last year, the abolition of age limit, the abolition of term limits is what has intensified that, what has made that now the legacy of the NRM regime. So any dialogue that seeks really to help deal with the fundamental problems of this country, not tinkle with the edges, must address transition. That's where the focus must be. as I understand it, in order to do that, you must create the kind of pressure that leaves those who hold the country captive to realize that it's no longer tenable. It's not a question, it must be wrestled. So transition would be the smoothening of a process of relinquishing power by those who hold it by force. And that's why.
So why don't you intensify your operations
and the dialogue
and wait for that constitutional time that is given for elections, overwhelm the regime with the people power or your support?
Oh yes,
and even if
for me that's
overwhelm them
for me,
at the ballot.
For me that's why I'm focused, and I think our people, the people of Uganda, must be focused on, you know, getting our hands together. You know, all of us, we must unite and shun all kinds of you know, divisive voices and forces that seek to divide on this basis, on that basis. You know, there are all kinds of narratives, including the ones you were advancing here. These are bush people, these are white people. We are Ugandans, period. And we all have an equal stake. The child who was born today, the one who was 90 years, we have an equal stake. Some may be retiring, but as Ugandans, we should have an equal stake. And we should, you know, unite, all of us, to say enough is enough. And unless we achieve that, hoping to dialogue ourselves out of the real serious problems that we are in may even be counterproductive. In fact, it's like what we are talking about when you have a cancer and the cancer is causing you to have fever, and somebody gives you tablets to quell your fever, put down your fever. You may be comforted to think that your problem is gone, while it is actually causing far more damage without you noticing, because you have been numbed into not feeling the pain. So dialogue can have that kind of effect. It can create a lull, you know, people are gathering and are talking and you know, feeling good that there is a discussion. But at the end of the day, it must go back to one thing. Either we recognize that our state is under capture, or we don't. In fact, I saw in the papers that, you know, dialogue will be opened by Mr. Museveni and so on. It is not. I have a lot of respect for the effort that has been done by some of our senior leaders, the elders and the religious leaders, to try and get the country back on course. But it will take a little more, you know, effort and recognition of where the cracks lies to resolve it. Otherwise, it can be palliative. It can be.
But when we look at the people in the opposition now, it is true, you're fractured. When you see what happened in Masaka, when the DP reunion, they fight. When you see your colleague, General Muntu, leaves the party and goes into new formation. But when you see this, UPC is not as strong as it used to be. So the regime you're trying to wrestle power from actually must be happier today than it was a couple of days ago.
Well, I wouldn't expect it to be if it is, if it understands what it faces. You see, I have said time and again that political parties will not thrive under a military regime. Political parties are democratic institutions. They function and thrive in a democratic environment. where there is no democratic environment, political parties won't thrive. But because they are the only legal entities in the current environment through which politics can be, to some extent, undertaken, we use them to the extent possible, but not oblivious of the fact that they can't function as fully fledged parties. Because if you have no freedom to get funding from your membership, you know, nobody in this town can write a check for FDC. No one. Because if you do, you are attracting danger to your business. Yet, of course, you see, I'm sure you've been seeing those who have been paying billions, hundreds of millions to the NRM with pride. Now, that indicates to you.
What's the reason for the internal squabbles in the opposition?
So you see, again, differences within political parties are a given, because we rally ourselves around around a common denominator of ideas.
Which is what?
You know,
for your case.
Yeah, like in the case of FDC, we first of all want to fight for democracy, the democratization of the country. That is critical. Having achieved that, we have a vision of how the democratic Uganda can transform people's lives. And there is a whole agenda of that. And we are agreed on all that, by the way. So, but that does not, and so there are two things. One is a contestation of leadership within political parties. Because, especially like FDC, we do not only want to achieve democracy in the country without exercising it within our own organization. And exercising democracy within our organization in a dictatorship is quite challenging. And those are some of the, you know, the contradictions that we have to deal with. So, but these are perfectly normal and expected. Indeed, the reason we fight for democracy is that people have the right and freedom to associate. So you associate with whoever you are comfortable to do, including disassociate. This is the right we are fighting for. You know, when you fight for democracy, you actually fight for the right of people not to support you. You know, you are not only fighting so that people may support you, but even so that they don't support you. So what is happening is not a problem. What would be a problem is if people were fleeing from opposition and supporting the junta. That would be problematic. As it is, happily, every day, people are deserting the junta, including the leaders. You saw the voting in Parliament the other day on the mobile money tax. In spite of the NRM leaders being whipped to support the government position, they rebelled. And that is indicative. You saw people on the critical issue of the age limit. NRM leaders said no, very many. Now, those NRM leaders and ourselves are occupying exactly the same space. Doesn't matter what they call themselves, whether NRM or what. This is why what will cause change is not the parties or party contestations. No. What will cause change are the vast majority of Ugandans, some organized in parties, some not organized in parties, all rallying together to say enough is enough.
Okay. Dr. Kizza Besigye, we are going to take a break. When we come back, I'll open the lines and you see the numbers on the screen so that you can call and tell us what you think. Maybe ask directly a question you may be having to ask Dr. Besigye directly, and he'll be able to respond when we return. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Kamara, and my guest tonight is retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye, the former president of the Forum for Democratic Change. Dr. Besigye, what is the new plan to reach the political promised land for you?
Well, I wouldn't call it a new plan. I think it's the plan that we have been using, which is really rallying people to struggle and to reclaim their power. And I am glad, you know, that it has taken long, but as I have been pointing out, I think we are really at a critical moment. Because some people who have been saying, you know, you people have failed and so on, they don't appreciate how struggles develop. Because this is a protracted struggle. It cannot happen overnight like a coup. And what you are seeing now, you know, the very serious challenges of security, the security system, not the security in the country, the security system that has eventually consumed people that were challenging us, the Kaihuras and so on, is an outcome of this protracted struggle. The collapse of the economy and you know, the attendant consequences of it. The collapse of legitimacy, which I was talking about. You know, the fact that now, including your Toro, where you come from, we had 2 members of parliament from Toro, NRM members of parliament, standing in parliament and saying, no, we don't support this. We had the bishop in Toro telling it to the face of Mr. Museveni, saying, you have changed the constitution, but please don't come back. These are things that have happened through the concerted effort of many people in this struggle. And they indicate that the regime is really in its last days. But not that it will go on its own. We must have our act together. So what needs to be done is not to change strategy, but to re-energize ourselves, to pull our hands together firmly, and finish the job. Okay, and I am very optimistic that that is already, I think, beginning to happen.
Let me open the line so that we get to know what Ugandans have on their minds tonight. And perhaps they have a question or two for you. The numbers on the screen, so let me take the very first caller online. Hello. Okay. The numbers are on the screen. You can call, and please, when the phone goes through, you'll have to turn down the volume of your TV set so that it doesn't send an echo into the studio. You know, many times you have been very optimistic, saying the regime is gone. It is in the last days. You know, I followed you as a reporter during many campaigns in different parts of the country, and you say it is finished, this is going. You know, in fact, in Masaka, you said, people of Masaka, you will see the man moving. I mean, that is the Besigye speak.
Yes.
The usual Besigye speech.
Possibly. You see, first of all, we must remain optimistic. If you are defeated in your mind, you won't get where you are going. And secondly, at the end of the day, really I think it's only God who has the power to determine the exact day when things will happen, when things will get together. But, you know, we've done what is humanly possible and succeeded in a large measure. When I tell you that we won elections and that we have evidence of our win, it's not gossip. And all Ugandans have been witnessing 3 elections that we have won very convincingly, and things happen the way they do. In this case, in the last case, just as an outright coup against the people. So, yes, struggles take a long time. You know, even with guns, people spend 20 years, 30 years fighting. And there is no moment in the struggle if you are seeing the progress that is being made that one should feel despondent that things are not going to happen. In this case, I can tell you I have never been as optimistic as I am even today.
Why would that be? Because now I'm sure many people would want to know. You have your colleagues more or less in disarray. You have the Comrade in Arms, General Muntu, who has just departed your party. I mean, were you even surprised when he left?
Well, to some extent, yes, because I had just chatted with him the day before, indicating that there was a need to talk amongst the founders of our party, which he was enthusiastically embraced. So I was rather surprised to that extent. But, you know, let me tell you that the problem, as I have pointed out to you, is not even how many parties proliferate on the side of the opposition. The critical matter is whether people are moving on the side of change. And they are moving in droves. You know, tomorrow I'm going back to Shema, where we have a by-election there. And the candidate of FDC this time was another DC of Mitoma. And, you know, he's a vibrant candidate of FDC. He's come with very many people who subscribed to NRM. And this is not because it was something that was easy some time back. It was not easy some time back for members of parliament to stand in parliament and oppose Mr. Museveni. It was not. But all these are indicators that the people seeking change have become the dominant factor in the country. And so it is easy for people now to associate. People will find it easier to associate when, and I can tell you, you know, not even, you know, of course I'm from, as you have said, I'm from the military background. And military officers serve on orders and so on. But we interact with so many of them. And happily, NRA, which later on became UPDF, was developed on a political basis. It was a political force. It was an armed wing of a...
For which you were a political commissar at one point?
No, I was the national political commissar, not the political commissar of NRA or UPDF. But the point I'm saying is that these brothers and sisters of ours in the forces are analytical. They also see what is going on. They have been developed from a political background. And on top of their own suffering, which is also quite significant, I laugh when I hear people say, you know, this UPDF is a disciplined force, it supports what is going on. You know, the chat we get with our colleagues is quite different. So we are in a situation where the very clear shift is for change. You know, I've been pointing out the question of voting, even within the rigged system, of areas where there are military police encampments. And they express themselves, you know, very clearly. So I am not bothered whatsoever about what is largely through political propagandists of the regime portrayed as a fractured, disintegrating opposition. On the contrary, there is a huge groundswell on the side of those who seek change. And you can see it anywhere, it's palpable. The people they are, beating, they beat them, they come back the following day. You saw the way they beat people in Karewe the other day when I was coming out of prison, But they have not stopped coming. That is what is indicative. Not so much the bickering of leaders on the opposition. And in fact, I dare say, we leaders are the problem of the people. Because the people are ahead of us. They see clearly what needs to be done. Whereas quite often we are trapped in small interests of ours.
Okay, unfortunately you seem to be getting some technical hitches in having our telephone lines come through, and for that will be, unless my producer you tell me you have sorted that. If you haven't, Dr. Besigye, what is going to be your concluding remark?
Well, first of all, to really say that as a country we are at a very, very critical moment where depending on how we manage, we can easily get off the cliff. And it calls on all of us citizens, because some people tend to blame, engage in blame games. You people in the opposition, what are you doing? People are commentators. This is not a time for commentating. It's a time for every Ugandan to step forward, and together we get our power back. And we have invested in the last 2 years. That's why, some people have been saying, Besigye, you are quiet, you are lost, you are this. We are doing a lot of work, not on cameras, to prepare for a transition, to procure and manage a transition. We are investing a lot of deliberate effort to see, even after this regime collapses, how do we quickly manage security? How do we quickly manage the economy so that people don't get into even more despair? How do we revamp the totally collapsed healthcare service so that people can again gain their healthcare? These are matters that require very intense focus, not on the screens, not on the streets, but also organizing for procuring the transition itself. Because we don't believe, as I have pointed out to you, that transition itself will happen through just sitting with Mr. Museveni on the table when he still controls all the levers of power.
All right.
We must first loosen those levers, and he realizes that he has no option but if he wants a safe exit, to negotiate his exit.
Thank you.
And we are very focused on that.
Thank you very much. Uganda, I'm sure you have listened to retired Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye in his higher firebrand tone and speaking like he always does. And you have a position tonight where he stands and perhaps where Uganda should be. And that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of On the Spot. Good night and God bless Uganda.